Hi, it's Dustin Lanier. Thanks for listening. Please find me on LinkedIn for original public sector operations content every week. And please reach out to me if I and my team of procurement professionals at Civic Initiatives can help you be a public procurement change agent. Today, we're going to talk about 5 watchwords for public procurement in 2022. It's obviously a conceit to try to summarize everything that we're dealing with in 5 words, and nobody's going to agree on the words, but that's what makes it fun. I posted an article with my 5 recommendations on things that I think are themes that I'm seeing. And then already in the comments, we had some great discussion from luminaries like Dugan Petty and Gary Lambert chiming in. So I was pleased that at least I put enough out there that could get some discussion going. So the 5 that I talked about were talent, velocity, portfolio, automation, which I'm going to already go ahead and pick up Dugan's word, which was digital, which is much better than automation, and leadership. And then in addition to that, there was several lobbies in there for agility and for collaboration. So put those in the consideration circle as well. Somewhere between those 5, I'm interested if anybody feels strongly about one or more of those. I feel pretty strongly on 3 of them that they have to be on that list. So I guess let's just open up the floor to whoever would like to pick up first. I don't want to just sit here and read the article. So out of that list of talent, velocity, portfolio, digital, leadership, collaboration, agility, somebody give me a strong opinion on one or more of those.
All right, Dustin. Well, I'm going to jump in because you opened up the floor. So there's 2 of them for me that really resonate. Leadership and automation/digital. I appreciate changing the term automation to digital. The reason why I don't like the word automation is it feels like we're going to kind of like computer ordering for fast food. Like that's not the role of procurement. The role of procurement is to have easier and more efficient processes, but still applying that critical analysis. And the component that we have played for the past couple of years throughout the pandemic is demonstrating leadership, right? So I'm going to put those 2 words together. I don't know how procurement could be any stronger of a leader in 2022 coming out of this crazy pandemic that we've been in. It feels like nothing gets accomplished without procurement, and we don't save taxpayer dollars without procurement. We are the partner for all agencies to think about strategic planning for their dollars, preparing for whatever their constituents may need. And if we can do that through digital processes, yay for procurement.
Justin, why don't you pick up next?
Yeah, I'll pick up. Your focus on talent and inclusion of talent really resonates with me. Jaime talked a lot about things that have been out there during the pandemic. More has been expected of procurement. Procurement's played a more prominent role in all of our organizations, both as we try to assure supply for the things that our organizations need now as we carry through and try to manage some of the inflationary forces that you see out there in the economy right now. That really has put a lot of focus on our talent as we sort of then layer on and try to introduce new technology. The role of our procurement professionals is broadening. The number of factors that they have to consider in any procurement is growing. And the sheer amount of work that is flowing through the organizations is also growing. And that puts a lot of pressure in terms of how you think about talent. What kind of people do you want to bring into your organization? What are the skills that you want them to come with? What are the skills that you want to develop in them while you have them in your organization? And then how do you connect them to the mission that your agency or your organization is doing so that they want to stay and grow their careers with you? There is, nothing that's happening in our organization without the people that we have on our staffs right now. And as dynamic as it is, I don't see that changing anytime in the near future.
Talent was my big one, and I'd just say a lot of ditto to what Justin just mentioned. I think this pandemic has created more of an employee market. They have more options on where they can go and what they can apply for and being able to negotiate, which really requires us to be more agile internally and be more flexible with what we're even offering in our packages. Typically, procurement budgets are often some of the smallest ones within an organization, and so that also impacts what type of incentives we're able to offer to bring in those qualified talents that we're looking for when we're matching it up with the true need of the organization. And then just retaining those individuals internally, what are the incentives to keep them on board once they are here? How are we developing them for their own professional goals as well as meeting the needs of the organization? I think are really key in making sure that they see buy-in in the process and see their role and their value clearly. And then I think also for us, we've had to increase our consulting position, more of the consulting role of the buyer or the procurement professional. And so being able to stretch individuals in that space that aren't maybe used to having to do that, we are having to navigate in that way and be more educational to our users. And so for some, that's can be a little scary. And for others, they're more welcoming of that change and being okay with being stretched. So when it comes to talent, that one really stuck out to me because there's a lot of focus that we're having to make sure we're shifting and putting that focus in the appropriate areas to keep quality talent, to keep moving our procurement shops forward.
Yeah, talent was first in my article for a reason. I started doing a speech last fall around it's go time, how procurement shops attract and retain talent today. And in that, I talk about procurement has never had, frankly, the job mobility options that are available to people in procurement now, and why it's so critical to think about how we design work that people will want to have and be able to market it so that people see procurement as a destination of choice. I think talent will be one of the ongoing themes throughout the year, and to me, that one was very important. The second one I had in the article that to me goes with it was around velocity. I struggled for the right word. If I was going to say the more accurate word, it probably would have been throughput, but throughput's not as good of a word as velocity. Thank you, Justin, for the suggestion. I think there's a lot of pressure on procurement shops just on the pure intake and management process with the ARPA money and some of the IIJA money that's going to press a lot of things through procurement that will need to have specific dates and specific timelines. There's a lot of widgets that have to go through the pipe, and we have to find the opportunity to both make them strategic, determine how we work through some of the issues around being able to manage all that. Jaime, I saw that you brought Mike Wenzel back in to help you with some of the ARPA procurement planning. I thought that was interesting. I think we'll see more trends of people trying to deal with just the mass of throughput and the mass of things that have to go through the system. And so talk about that decision and your thoughts on how to move things along while still maintaining quality.
For those of you that don't know Mike Wenzel, Mike is the former state of Maine CPO from, I don't know, X amount of years ago. I won't date him now, but he had been retired. He had worked for NASPA Value Point for a period of time, so he's very familiar with the national landscape as well as the state of Maine landscape. And I did post the position to help us with what we're calling Maine Jobs and Recovery Act, which is a subset of the ARPA money. I needed somebody quick because the volume was coming in. Mike knew the lay of the land, and I was able to sort of plug and play with him, if you will. That has been a huge resource. I don't remember all the statistics he gave me this morning, but I will tell you of the over 300 business cases that we're expecting in the state, we've only received 60. And so that's right. That doesn't mean that the procurements have done. That means that we've received 60 requests to the appropriate committee within our state to spend that money. So we have a lot more to go. We're just at the beginning of the path. And in my brain, I was sort of thinking, oh, we're much farther along. This isn't going to be so bad. And now I realize, oh, that's not so good. But I do think, to your point, Dustin, that there are opportunities out there that we should be looking at from either retired folks, young folks, for interns to tap into some of that talent. We have had some incredible interviews with very talented young folks looking to break out into procurement. Just recently, we have an opening for an intern to come in for the summer. And I have been so impressed with the folks that have said they really want to get into procurement because it meets their kind of career path and what they're looking for. So super excited about that. And I just wanted to say, Justin, I appreciate the word velocity. It took me a minute to kind of wrap my brain around that word. I'm more used to thinking about it from a throughput perspective. But as I think more and more about velocity, it does make a lot of sense as we start thinking about ARPA and where we're going in the next couple of years.
James, why don't you jump in?
Absolutely, and it's great to be back with everyone. Automation is the one that stuck out to me, and as a bridge with talent, one of the ways that we are providing some growth for our talent and helping our talent feel more valued in their work and what they're providing to us is through automation. And you say, well, how is that? What does that do? Well, things like our purchase requisition systems, our PO management, invoice management, those are things that, depending on your workload, could take you 1 to 2 hours of normal workday just working through requisitions and purchase orders. Over the past year and a half, we've been able to automate a lot of those things, which have allowed our team to free up their time for more planning and strategy. And so automation has just really eased our workday. And now we are looking at ways to currently work with some of our contractors in automating some of our operating procedures. And to be specific, our goal is, of course, to manage the taxpayer dollars appropriately, but also help our program offices manage these contracts. And what we found is some of our program offices are paying things like detention on certain contracts simply because they're not aware how their operation is running. And what we found is our contractors have automated systems that tell them when they've been at a location for too long. And we're looking at ways to get those systems to speak with our systems or to ping us and let us know if we're at a threat of detention and things of that nature in order to help our program offices not to exceed amounts. Automation has been a godsend. We're looking at automating some of our proposal responsiveness checks as well. So automation is where we're at right now. And that's one of the big things that we're focusing on for 2022.
Well, we're blessed with a guest speaker. Gary, you are, of course, well known in the procurement world, and you had some great comments on why you thought agility was one of the key things for procurement in 2022. There's a lot of ways to take that word and roll that word around your tongue. So why don't you talk about what you think agility means today in this context?
Sure. And thanks for moving me into the speaker box for a few minutes here. One of the things I was thinking about as I was sort of putting the package of words that you put together, Dustin, and thank you for that, was how does all this fit in the environment that we're having to operate in now and have been in the last couple of years? And also, how does this package up given that it's the Super Bowl of gubernatorial elections, right? This is where the majority of the governors are either reelected or new governors come in. And so as I was thinking about things like velocity, I'm thinking, well, velocity is really great. And I really appreciate the power of that word. But if we focus more on velocity itself, we can overshoot a lot of things. And it can take a lot of energy to bring it back. And in this environment, what I'm really experiencing and what I'm hearing when I talk to people around the country is more a need to really be nimble and agile and be able to shift direction quickly onto something completely off the radar, completely outside of the portfolio or outside of the portfolio management plan. And I think that's becoming more and more and more important. Just think about this most recent test kit debacle. We were all left in a position where we had to pivot quickly again, and we had to figure out a way to get product, in this case, on the shelf and delivered to people in need yesterday. And that really wasn't in our plan, at least. But what it did bring up is a whole bunch of issues that I tried to explore through organizations and through other states about how can we quickly organize and get together to work together, only to find out that people weren't there. People were really at a point of, how do I just focus on moving resources around to do this particular task in an emergency way? And how do I outcompete my colleagues individually to get what I need to satisfy my administration's requirements? So I think of that and those experiences and go, we really need to be agile. And it's not necessarily just PPE stuff, cybersecurity, technology shifts and changes, adoption of and consideration of things like state ramp, and how agile are we at incorporating something like state ramp into existing contracts or RFPs or RFQs or whatever to get a better quality solution out of the vendor community? And how ready and how quickly are we as a profession ready to just turn on a dime and do those kinds of things? Or is this going to be yet another 5-year study exercise that eventually gets us there? So I'll stop there on that, but I can wander in a lot of directions on this one.
I like it. Very articulate on some of the issues. And, you mentioned some of the cyber and the state ramp, and that's areas where Jenny is often some of our watchword. And so, Jenny, you haven't had a chance to chime in yet, so why don't you come on?
Sure. Hi, everybody, and welcome, Gary. All of the buzzwords I sent were actually from Gary's website, the Operational Services Division. They have a publication called By the Way, B-U-Y, The Way, which they publish, and the term pivot and agility and flexibility were part of that. So the two buzzwords, I think, from what your list is, would be leadership and agility, similar to what Jaime had said, for the same reason. One thing that the Operations Services Division has done an excellent job is they talk about strategic sourcing and really thinking about all of the needs as opposed to one specific need at a specific point in time. So I think a lot of the contracts that are out there, the statewide contracts, are designed to be flexible and to allow departments to pivot and do different things. So I think the agility that Gary's talking about is not just being able to change things midstream, but also really thinking about how your contracts are designed to be agile for emerging needs and making sure you have that door or that window in your back pocket. So if you need to change, you're able to use the existing structure that you have.
So let me articulate why I think the word portfolio is on this list. And some of you may be like, portfolio, that's not a word that I use all the time, but I'll tell you, it's a word I use constantly because I think you can carry a lot of concepts in that word when we are doing assessment work and helping a shop that maybe is very transactional or primarily focused on the purchasing function, that if we think about our work in terms of a portfolio, that it's not just the individual transactions, but what is the intellectual property that we derive from those actions? How do we create contracts that capture the value of what we did so that it can be used more than once? Create machines, if you will, that can do work for us. And within that portfolio concept, that's where we think about things like the master contract area that Jenny was just talking about. Also, do we have a diverse enough contract portfolio to deal with ongoing supply chain disruptions that may still be ahead of us? And, Rob Hanfield has done a good job of talking about needing to anticipate supply chain. I think within the word portfolio, you can also think about, do we have a vendor mix that matches what we say that our policy goals are in terms of DEI or sustainability? And then also cooperative contracts. So are we doing work by hand at a buyer level that could be solved by a cooperative contract that would then allow us to use that buyer time on something that is more unique to our areas? So I realize that portfolio may be a word that doesn't roll off of everyone's tongue all the time, but I think if you think about how we compile the outputs of our work into something that can have a lasting legacy and be part of our ability to do work, that's why it makes sense.
Hey, I really like that word portfolio. And to your point, we absolutely, I've never considered that when I think about procurement, only like in financial ways do I think of portfolio. But then we're tied to finance a lot of times, right? So it did make me really look at my operations and see, are we diversified in our strategies? And just looking at it from a portfolio standpoint, then we've got some work to do. But to some of the things you just mentioned, I do see we are we have some things in path that actually are creating a portfolio, such as our system contracts, where we're actually making sure we're going out to the market and considering all of our users to make master contracts versus having individual contracts for each department. We're kind of looking at what our mass spend is and saving in that way in most instances. And then definitely we're increasing our cooperative purchasing utilization, and it absolutely does free up time to be able to focus in on some of those more complex strategies that we need to take in some of our procurement. So I definitely just appreciate the change of word to kind of focus on it as a portfolio. And I guess it could also be looked at as a strategy, right? But I definitely can appreciate that word, Dustin.
Justin, you do strategic sourcing responsibility among, I'm sure, many other tasks as assigned for the California system. So how do you think about portfolio as a concept? Obviously, you do a lot of category management. I thought category was too small of a word for what I was trying to put across. So do you ever use that concept?
Yeah, I think there's been some really insightful comments already in the conversation, particularly by Gary and your idea of portfolio, Dustin. Certainly at University of California and on my team, we think about strategic sourcing as a force multiplier for our campuses. We are trying to help our 10 campuses go to market together to develop supplier relationships that really serve the entirety of the system. And what it really means to serve the entirety of the system on these contracts is, in some cases, thousands of requisitioners who will be placing orders against these contracts across our system, during the course of the contract. And so we're thinking about, one, how do we produce more financial value, but we're also thinking about how we integrate better with the supplier, how we make the supplier more accessible to our users, whether they're in labs or office buildings or in their homes increasingly. And how do we get the most out of that supplier relationship? This idea of portfolio, I think is kind of a linchpin to the whole thing that's driving a lot of the conversation today. The requirements that have been placed on procurement organizations have only grown over the pandemic. There's more policy focus on diversity, equity, inclusion. There's more uncertainty in the supply chain. There's a more dynamic labor environment. There is, funding for things to be purchased, but not necessarily, funding and growth for the procurement organizations to purchase them. And so a lot of the strategies that we talk about in the other buzzwords are ways that, we can be agile to accommodate that increased activity and the pace that we're seeing in our organization. So whether it's, using cooperative agreements, whether it's digitizing your work and putting yourself in a position to taking advantage of the data sets, we're all coping with this environment where there's a broader portfolio, a more uncertain portfolio, and one that requires us to make more difficult kinds of decisions and strategies. So it's a really, I think it's been the most exciting time to be in procurement and public procurement in my career.
So Jaime, when I asked everybody to send me 5 words to try to have some composite but then I could also reorganize to be thematic, you had included some aspects of DEI and sustainability in some of your word choices, which in the interest of trying to put a lot of concepts into one word, I rolled into portfolio as a concept that can speak to strategic sourcing, as well as do we have the right mix of our vendor portfolio that reflects our policy goals and what we say that we are and how we say that we want to spend and expend money. So any thoughts that you have against some of your word choices in there and how it ties to the portfolio concept?
Yeah, I like the portfolio concept. I think you can do a lot with that word. I would just add, right, when I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's more than just the resulting contracts that are in the portfolio. It's really the thought process behind procuring the contract, all the way through helping vendors maintain contracts, gain new contracts, build the relationships with the state. So I guess I would add to that education. Education, and there's another conversation I had the other day which brought up the word simplification. In the state of the state for West Virginia, that particular governor rolled out the contracting process. And he was saying that one of his goals for this coming year was simplification of the process, because this process had 85 or 95 different steps on it, which, he was making a point, of course, that it can often be too complicated to encumber money within the state government contracting system. Well, imagine being a minority-owned business or a business that's not used to dealing with state contracts, and not only maybe there's a terrific program that a state has set up, you get the contract, but now maybe you get 10 contracts. And how do you manage 10 contracts? How do you ramp up for that? How do you maintain the relationships? How do you wind down the contract? So I think portfolio can be expanded a little bit more, just to think about from a broader scope. The other word, Dustin, that I offered was strategy or process. And I think we've covered a lot of that through our conversation today. I would just expand that when we start talking about cooperative contracts. Municipalities, localities, universities, states, other countries, we're all trying to buy the same thing in virtually the same manner. And if somebody can do it better, somebody can do it just a little bit differently, it's worth having that connection and that collaboration so that everybody wins. That was a key concept that I think COVID brought out, was being able to share information with others that would be beneficial for everybody. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Gary on this call, because Gary, it's not often that I get to give public acknowledgement to you, but I know 9 out of 10 times when I have something that comes up from another state or somebody's asked me a question, Massachusetts is the first one that I can think of, and I say, oh yeah, Gary knows exactly how to do that. Think of Gary Lambert. So Gary, just kudos to you and your team for coming up with some really innovative processes that truly do work for the taxpayers in Massachusetts.
So, Jaime, thank you, but you're too kind, first and foremost. I want to make one comment building on what both Justin and Jaime said around portfolio. I think it's important when one thinks about portfolio and portfolio management, and I think, Christine, you may have said it in terms of thinking about it from a financial context. In a portfolio world, I think there are a bunch of things we need to really think about when we create a portfolio and how we're going to manage it. And some of that really is creating the portfolio based on the customer need, because the customer is really the person who's going to drive success or failure in that portfolio. And understanding that need to even have those conversations with the supplier community. And then it's really thinking about from what you want your portfolio manager to do, what are those metrics? Whether they're socioeconomic metrics, whether they're sales-based metrics, whether they're vendor performance-based metrics, but what are they and how do you measure the success or failure of a portfolio or portions of a portfolio over time to make sure that you're adapting to the needs of the customer in order to make that an effective portfolio? Or, do you not have that portfolio anymore because there may no longer be demand for that stuff, those services, those goods, or both?
Good stuff. So, Christina, you gave me some concepts as well as we were building this out. Any observation that you have off of some of this discussion or anything that you wanted to highlight?
Building on the leadership aspect, when Dustin and I talk to shops, there's always kind of this theme of them not wanting to be stagnant, wanting to improve. And that's definitely been enhanced the past couple of years with the pandemic. So one of the words I thought of related to that was compare. They say comparison is the thief of joy. But when it comes to benchmarking, I think even especially for smaller procurement shops or entities, it's still critical to stay ahead of the curve or at least in line with it. One way to do that is to take opportunities to stack your procurement office up to others, whether it's a local benchmarking award program, state, national, et cetera. It can give you those bullet points that, you may have been kind of grasping for to see where you need to improve or where you are doing well at. And so the reward is really in that exercise of seeing how your shop stacks up. And you may be pleasantly surprised, but you'll also learn so much about where you may need to level up. So if any of those smaller shops kind of looking at where do I start in 2022, I feel like that would be a good place.
So the other word that got 3 or 4 people chiming in on was collaborative and being able to build more interaction. And I had a side person who sent me a note about trying to build more positive relationships between the purchasing community and the supplier community in terms of the way that they think about going to market and trying to do market research. So Justin, maybe could you give some thought to the concept about collaborative as a watchword, and how do we build more collaboration between and across procurement shops and then between procurement shops and the supplier community?
I think the increase in collaboration that we've seen over the last couple of years in a lot of ways is one, a response to the increase in the sheer number of things that are expected of procurement organizations, but then also just generally like the increase of risk in the environment. When you look out into what's going on, right? There's greater availability risk than there than you would have thought of a couple of years ago. There's greater pricing volatility. There is more scarce labor. There are for any decision that your organization makes, the outcome of that decision ultimately is less predictable. And so, I think that really encourages leaders to act with humility and talk to their peers in forums like this one, where you can get new ideas and new perspectives, and someone can think about problems that you may be encountering in your organization from a different perspective and give you some insights into some possible outcomes that you don't have there. Cooperatives, collaboration and cooperative procurement, as Jamie's talked about, can be a good way for us to share the load in terms of the work that we do with competitive solicitations. At the University of California, we work hard both to be a sponsor or lead agency of cooperative agreements, but also to be adopters when it makes sense in our category strategies. And some of the things that we want to accomplish by being a lead agency is to be able to create things like to build into our supplier relationships, things like sustainability programs that can be turnkey so that smaller agencies that maybe don't have the strategic bandwidth or time to worry about how do you structure something that in that environment have something that they can build on and adopt. We as the public procurement community really have the capacity to elevate each other as we get through this difficult time.
So Jenny, when you gave me your 5 words, you included the concept of patience, which I thought was interesting. Talk about why you included the word patience.
Yeah, and again, I'm gonna say that I got it from Gary's group. This is one of the concepts that his staff had included, but I think some of it is, and I think it goes into the collaboration and really understanding what your supply chain is. I think everybody's focused on what that means now, because it's not that you just order it and you get it in the normal time frame, because there's shortages, because there's delays in shipping. We're really faced with a different environment than we have been before. So I think the patience is really kind of building that into the process and understanding that you're not going to have a 2-day shipping for a lot of things like you used to do. And so you have to be thinking about more a longer term process. And that also impacts the other thing I identified was budgeting, because if you're crossing fiscal years and you don't get things delivered within the fiscal year, then you have budgeting implications in certain states where that money won't be available when the goods actually come in. So that collaboration is not just internally across departments and with your suppliers, but it's also with your legislature to make sure that the budgeting considerations are part of the purchasing calendar. And if you know that you're running out of time, is to be working to make sure that that money is going to be moved into the next fiscal year. So when you finally get what you need, you'll have money to pay for it.
Gary, any extension off of that before I start to close us out on this call?
I think the one add-on I'd put to that is planning and really providing people, your customers, with enough information so that they can be patient and plan accordingly in terms of trying to get as much lead time as possible. Or, as Jenny points out, if the timing isn't going to be right to have the funding available any longer, to really have that opportunity to shift gears and pivot and invest your money as a customer in something else, knowing that you're not going to get that Chevy Bolt that's just now getting ready to be produced after the battery issues were resolved. Those probably aren't going to be here for July. So if you're the vehicle portfolio manager and you're trying to drive part of your agenda in the portfolio to do carbon reduction, then you need to give your customers the information to go, you're really not going to get from here to there in the next 3 months or 5 months. You might want to think about doing something else. Or, to go to Jenny's point, to work with the legislature and see if you can get some commitments somewhere along the way that there'll be an opportunity to extend your funding beyond the life of its current use.
So, Christin, I'll come to you. One other word you threw out that I thought was definitely in the honorable mention circle, if not straight on, was consultative, and that you've been trying to stress consultative approaches from the team in terms of dealing with the customers and the way that you build that messaging. And I love that concept. So maybe talk about what you've been trying to do about being consultative.
Absolutely. I think the biggest driver in that process, or just trying to make sure that our users look at us as, solution oriented, being able to give them the best guidance and the best solution at all times, versus being more of the paper pusher or whatever I send you. I just see it happen on the other end. Like, there's really a conversation that happens, and really encouraging that those conversations happen in a proactive way, just in the very planning stages when they're thinking about their projects, to bring them to us to help them out. As far as the internal staff and the professionals, procurement professionals, it's encouraging them to be solution oriented and to really make sure they're taking the time to dig into the processes, dig into the scope of work, and determine what is going to be the most efficient manner of procurement to get them what they need. And just being able to answer questions, and it almost has an even greater customer service piece to it. But definitely just making sure they see us as more of a consultant, offering them solutions, giving them guidance, and not just paper pushers. And, they just see the end result and they're really involved, really along the way. And it also encourages what I think has been important for the procurement professionals to be able to assume and have an accountability for their authority, and to accept that they do actually have authority and have the rights or the licensure as a procurement professional to be able to give guidance and give direction and say what can and can't happen in very firm and consistent ways with the users, but also, again, continue to educate them so that they can understand why a process even has to occur the way it does, giving the backstory, not just giving this is the outcome that has to happen. So far, it's still in the early stages, but I think there is a good reception to it from our users and from the staff.
Well, I think that's fantastic and probably as good of a closer as we're going to have. With that, I want to thank you guys all for being here. I like the discussion. I'll process that and put that up sometime later today or tomorrow, and then I'll do a follow-up slider with some of the information that we talked about and some reorganization to try to give voice to all these words. And like I said at the start, trying to squeeze all of procurement into 5 words is, of course, a humorous exercise, but it creates, I think, good conversation, and all of this discussion was really strong. So thank you guys all for being on and for contributing to something that I think I know I had several people indicate they wanted to listen to this later, so I'm sure this will get a lot of legs. Hi, it's Dustin Lanier. Thanks for listening. Please find me on LinkedIn for original public sector operations content every week. And please reach out to me if I and my team of procurement professionals at Civic Initiatives can help you be a public procurement change agent.